The human raised his blood-drenched arms and roared in primal triumph, a sound that struck fear into the hearts of every alien present. In that moment, Doktar understood that the Academy would be forever changed. Humanity's reputation as a weak, primitive species had just been shattered by a 19-year-old brute from the slums of Neo-Chicago. Here, Brian was the only human. But beyond the borders of known space, mankind had already become the most devastating weapon in the war against the Kroth Empire. At the bleeding edge of the conflict, elite human shock troops fought with a mad fury that terrified friend and foe alike. Soon, all the galaxy would learn what Doktar now knew. Humans were the most dangerous creatures in the universe, and Brian Murphy was only the beginning. In the days following Brian's brutal victory, Doktar found himself utterly consumed by thoughts of the human cadet. He haunted the edges of the training grounds, keen eyes studying Brian's every move as the young man sparred with opponents of various species. Each time, the result was the same: Brian triumphing through sheer ferocity and a complete disregard for his own well-being. In the solitude of his quarters, Doktar began to imitate Brian's techniques, throwing wild haymakers at imaginary foes. He relished the burn of his muscles, the electric thrill of unbridled aggression. For a Romulan raised to prize discipline and restraint above all else, it was a heady rush. Doktar rounded on her, eyes blazing. "You're just too tame to see it, Vara, all of you. The humans have unlocked something primal, something powerful, and we need that power if we're going to beat the Kroth." Vara recoiled as if struck. "Listen to yourself. You sound unhinged. Please, Doktar. Let this go before it consumes you." But Doktar was already too far gone. He brushed past Vara without another word, his mind whirling with thoughts of Brian and the secrets of human combat. The next day, Doktar approached Brian directly. The human regarded him warily, no doubt remembering their first tense encounter. "What do you want, Romulan?" Doktar met Brian's gaze unflinchingly. "I want you to train me. Teach me to fight like a human." Brian barked out a laugh. "You? No offense, but you're not exactly built for brawling." Doktar's face hardened. "I'm stronger than I look, and I'm a fast learner." Their first sparring session was brutal. Doktar hit the mat again and again, his green blood splattering the training room floor. But each time he dragged himself back to his feet, eyes alight with a feverish intensity. "Again," he snarled through split lips. "Hit me again." Brian obliged with increasing force, a glimmer of respect kindling in his eyes. When Doktar finally collapsed, unable to rise, the human extended a hand to help him up. "Not bad, Romulan. You've got guts, I'll give you that." Doktar reveled in his newfound power, in the intoxicating rush of shedding his Romulan reserve. But even as he grew stronger, faster, more lethal, a small voice whispered in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded disturbingly like Vara's. "Harder!" Brian barked as Doktar pummeled a makeshift punching bag. "Humans don't pull their punches. We hit to hurt, to kill if necessary." Sweat dripped from Doktar's ridged forehead as he unleashed a flurry of strikes. His knuckles split, green blood mixing with the grime on the bag. The pain only fueled his frenzy. Nearby, a Vulcan and an Andorian grappled on worn mats, practicing human wrestling techniques. Their faces contorted with effort, shedding their species' typical composure in favor of raw aggression. Zephyr, his face still bearing faint scars from his defeat, approached Brian with fire in his eyes. "We've mastered your forms," he hissed, "but how do we know they work in real combat?" After heated debate, a plan took shape. They would infiltrate the Nebula's Edge, a seedy bar on the outskirts of the station known for its rough clientele. The night of their excursion arrived. Doktar's pulse raced as he entered the dimly lit establishment, the reek of alien liquor assaulting his nostrils. He scanned the room, cataloging potential threats. A pair of hulking Klingons arguing over a game of chance, a reptilian Gorn nursing a luminous drink in the corner. At Brian's subtle signal, chaos erupted. Doktar lunged at the nearest Klingon, driving his forehead into the warrior's nose with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed as he followed up with a brutal elbow strike to the throat. All around him, his fellow students unleashed months of pent-up aggression. Vara, who had reluctantly joined their group, moved with fluid grace, her slender arms a blur as she pummeled a leering Ferengi. For a moment, Daktar reveled in the carnage. This was what he had yearned for, the intoxicating rush of unleashing his newfound skills. But his triumph was short-lived. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead as Academy security stormed the bar. Daktar felt the sting of restraints snapping around his wrists, the bitter taste of defeat on his tongue. Hours later, he stood before the Academy's disciplinary board. Brian and the others lined up beside him. The room crackled with tension as Daktar launched into an impassioned defense of their actions. A chime at his door interrupted his brooding. It was Zephyr, flanked by two nervous-looking Tellarites. "They want to join," Zephyr said simply. Daktar's lips curled into a predatory grin. This was only the beginning. On a night like any other, Daktar led his group to their makeshift arena, a disused cargo bay buried deep in the station's bowels. The air was thick with the familiar tang of sweat and purpose as they paired off to spar. A sudden tremor shook the deck plates, sending equipment clattering to the floor. Vara froze mid-strike, her pointed ears twitching. "Did you feel that?" Before anyone could respond, the bay's ancient comm system crackled to life with a burst of static and panicked voices. Through the garbled transmission, one word rang clear. "Intruders!" "Riansu!" he hissed, recognizing the radical faction's tactics from his strategic studies. The fight was on. Vara ducked under a wild swing, driving her knee into her opponent's solar plexus. As he doubled over, she brought her elbow down on the base of his skull with a sickening crack. "Two more on your 6, she called out, already pivoting to engage her next target. Alarms blared as the Academy's security forces scrambled to respond, but they were outmatched by the Riansu's holographic deception. Daktar watched in frustration as a squad of guards ran right past a cluster of cloaked intruders. A familiar voice cut through the din. "Daktar, over here!" Brian Murphy materialized from a side corridor, his uniform torn and smeared with alien blood. The human's eyes gleamed with a predatory light that sent a thrill of recognition through Daktar. "What's the situation?" Daktar demanded as Brian joined their group. "Bad," Brian spat. "These bastards are after some new cloaking tech. They've taken control of the main security hub and half the compound." Daktar's mind raced, years of tactical training meshing with his newfound combat instincts. "We need to bottleneck them, cut off their escape routes." Just when victory seemed within reach, a fresh wave of Riansu forces materialized, their weapons already blazing. Daktar felt the sting of a grazing shot across his shoulder, the smell of burnt flesh filling his nostrils. Daktar's team retreated, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. As they regrouped in a defensible position, the distant rumble of approaching ships signaled the arrival of Academy reinforcements. The Riansu, realizing their mission had failed, began a frantic withdrawal. Daktar watched with grim satisfaction as the last of the invaders fled, their prized cloaking technology still safely out of reach. In the aftermath, as the fires were extinguished and the wounded tended to, Daktar found himself standing before the Academy's disciplinary council once more. But this time, the mood was markedly different. The council chamber fell silent as Admiral Thax leaned forward, his intense look fixed on Daktar. "Your actions today were unorthodox," the Admiral said, each word carefully measured, "but effective." Murmurs rippled through the assembled officials. Daktar stood not slouching at all, green blood still crusted on his knuckles. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices. Some cheered, while others protested vehemently. Daktar caught fragments of heated debates. "Human savagery! Necessary evolution! A disgrace to Romulan tradition!" Before Daktar could respond, a towering figure blocked their path. Commander Zoran, the Academy's most decorated Riansu instructor, loomed over them, his lip curled in barely concealed contempt. "So," Zoran sneered, "the Romulan mongrel who fancies himself a human." His gaze raked over Daktar's battered form. "Your little display may have impressed some, but true warriors know the superiority of our time-honored combat doctrines." Zoran's eyes narrowed. "Pretty words. Care to back them up?" He raised his voice, addressing the gathered crowd. I challenge you, Dakatar, to a sanctioned duel. Let us settle once and for all which method reigns supreme, our noble Romulan traditions or your human-inspired barbarity. I accept, Daktar said, his voice ringing out clear and strong. Zoran's lips twisted into a predatory smile. Excellent. 1 week from today, in the Academy Coliseum, I look forward to educating you thoroughly. Later, in the relative quiet of their makeshift training area, Brian paced back and forth. This is a trap, he growled. Zoran's baiting you, trying to get you overconfident. Listen to me, Brian insisted, grabbing Daktar's shoulder. Zoran's not just some run-of-the-mill instructor. He's a decorated war hero with more confirmed kills than half the Academy combined. You need to be smart about this. Finally, the day arrived. Daktar stood in the Coliseum's antechamber, the roar of the crowd a distant rumble. He wrapped his hands methodically, each movement precise and focused. Vara appeared at his side, her eyes searching his face. Are you ready for this? Daktar nodded, a feral grin spreading across his features. I was born ready. The arena doors slid open, bathing him in harsh light. Daktar strode out onto the sand, drinking in the thunderous applause. Across the arena, Zoran emerged from the shadows, his face an impassive mask. Zoran struck first, a lightning-fast series of traditional Romulan forms. Daktar countered with the raw, aggressive style he'd honed over months of secret training. The opening exchanges were a blur of strikes and counterstrike, neither man able to gain a clear advantage. Frustration gnawed at Daktar. He'd trained for this, visualized his victory 1,000 times. Why couldn't he land a decisive blow? As the second round began, Daktar abandoned caution, pressing forward with reckless aggression. The older Romulan's carefully controlled facade crumbled, replaced by a snarl of pure animal rage. He lunged forward, fingers clawing for Daktar's eyes. Daktar barely managed to turn his head, feeling Zoran's nails rake across his cheek. Before he could recover, Zoran's knee slammed into his groin with crushing force. Daktar doubled over, gasping for air. The crowd's cheers turned to shocked gasps as Zoran pressed his advantage, raining down brutal, unrelenting strikes. Blood and spittle flew as Zoran's fist connected with Daktar's jaw. Through the haze of pain, a chilling realization dawned. Zoran fought with a savagery that matched, even exceeded, anything Daktar had learned from humans. As he staggered back, barely staying on his feet, Daktar caught a glimpse of Zoran's face. The older Romulan's eyes blazed with a primal hunger, all pretense of civility stripped away. With a roar of desperation, Daktar launched himself at Zoran. His vision narrowed to a tunnel of green flesh and flashing teeth. He bit, clawed, and struck with every dirty trick Brian had ever shown him. In the final seconds of the match, Daktar found himself atop Zoran, raining down blow after blow. The older Romulan's face was a ruined mess, but still he snarled defiance. The bell rang, signaling the end of the bout. Daktar stumbled back, chest heaving. His own face was a mask of blood and bruises, but he remained standing. A hush fell over the arena as the judges conferred. After an agonizing wait, the verdict was announced. Victory to Daktar by the narrowest of margins. The crowd's reaction was muted, a far cry from the adulation Daktar had imagined. As medics rushed to attend to both fighters, Daktar caught his reflection in a polished surface. The face that stared back at him was barely recognizable, a feral, blood-splattered visage that sent a chill down his spine. Daktar looked up, confusion evident in his battered features. There has to be a better way, he said slowly. A path that harnesses that human fire without losing our Romulan control. Vara nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Then let's find it, together. As the station's night cycle began, Daktar rose unsteadily to his feet. His body ached, but his mind was alight with purpose. He had glimpsed the abyss of pure savagery, and now he would forge a new path, one that balanced the best of both worlds. In the days that followed, whispers of a new fighting style began to spread through the academy. They called it Ganra Khatri, savage discipline, and at its heart stood Daktar, battered but unbroken, ready to show the galaxy a new way forward. Admiral Thax, ever the pragmatist, recognized the potential of this new fighting style. Quietly, he authorized the formation of elite commando units trained in Dakhtar's methods. These shadow operatives would become the Academy's ace in the hole against the relentless Kroth Empire. The scene that greeted them upon arrival was one of devastation. Shattered hulls of half-built starships littered the orbital dockyards. On the planet's surface, the remnants of the defensive force huddled behind hastily erected barricades. Corporal Hank Brute Miller, a grizzled human veteran, eyed Dakhtar's alien commandos with suspicion. "So you're the cavalry, huh?" he growled, spitting a glob of synthesized tobacco. "Hope you boys are ready for a fight." Dakhtar bared his teeth in what passed for a Romulan grin. "We live for it." Brute Miller and his Marines gaped in awe as the aliens tore through the Kroth ranks. "Well, I'll be damned," the corporal muttered, before bellowing orders to his own troops. "Don't let those pointy-eared bastards show us up. Give 'em hell." Massive, troll-like monstrosities lumbered onto the battlefield, shrugging off heavy weapons fire like raindrops. These bioengineered juggernauts smashed through Allied defensive lines with terrifying ease. "Fall back!" Brute Miller roared, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. "Standard munitions are useless." Doctor's mind raced, pieces of a plan falling into place. He grabbed Miller's shoulder, green eyes blazing with intensity. "I need your loudest sound systems and brightest lights, now!" Minutes later, a cacophony of noise erupted across the battlefield. Human metal music, Andorian war chants, and Tellarite mating calls blasted at ear-splitting volumes. Strobe lights pulsed in dizzying patterns, creating a disorienting maelstrom of sensory overload. The juggernaut creatures stumbled, their primitive brains overwhelmed by the onslaught. Dakhtar seized the moment, leading his Vindicators in a lightning strike. They swarmed the monsters, planting breaching charges on vulnerable joints and hurling thermite grenades into gaping maws. Brute Miller, a manic grin splitting his weathered face, joined the fray. His combat knife found purchase in a juggernaut's eye, and he roared in triumph as the beast toppled. The alien commandos surged forward, a tide of controlled savagery crashing into the Kroth lines. Dakhtar moved like a force of nature, each strike a perfect blend of precision and raw power. Green blood mingled with the ichor of his foes as he carved a path of destruction. As consciousness faded, Dakhtar found himself adrift in a sea of memory. He saw his former self, the meek scholar, disdainful of violence. That Dakhtar regarded him with horror, recoiling from the blood-soaked warrior he'd become. "Easy there, soldier," a gruff voice cautioned. Corporal Miller materialized at his bedside, looking worse for wear but very much alive. "That barb lancer did a number on you." Before Dakhtar could respond, the door hissed open. Admiral Vrath, the Academy's commandant, strode in, his craggy alien features set in grim lines. "On your feet, cadet," Vrath barked. "The galaxy's going to hell, and I need every able body." Vrath's eyes narrowed. "The Kroth are advancing on all fronts. We're losing systems daily." He paused, mandibles clicking in agitation. "But your little display on Sigma-9 gave me an idea." "Assemble your team," Vrath ordered. "You leave in 48 hours. The next 2 days passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Dakhtar handpicked his squad, Zephyr, Vara, and other veterans of his underground fight club, alongside Brian Murphy and a contingent of Miller's battle-hardened Marines. In the cramped hold of their captured Kroth transport, Dakhtar briefed on his team. "We're riding this bucket straight through their orbital defenses." Gesturing to a holographic display, "Once planetside, we infiltrate, gather intel, and sabotage their dreadnought production route." The insertion went smoother than anyone dared hope. Piggybacking on legitimate supply traffic, they slipped past Krios Gamma's formidable defenses without raising an alarm. Vara's typically stoic features twisted in disgust. "We need to destroy this abomination." Before Dakhtar could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. They'd been made. Miller's Marines fought with the raw tenacity that had first inspired Dakhtar, laying ambush after ambush. Human ingenuity coupled with alien precision, it was Ganra Khatri writ large, and it was beautiful in its savagery. But as they neared the extraction point, a new horror emerged. The first wave of completed super soldiers burst from their tanks, unholy fusion of conquered species' deadliest traits. They tore through the facility's defending garrison without difficulty. Dokhtar's mind raced, assessing options that grew more limited by the second. With a sinking feeling, he realized there was only one path forward. "New plan," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the sounds of battle. "We're detonating the georeactor now. It'll flash freeze this entire hellhole." Zephyr's eyes widened. "That'll trigger a localized environmental catastrophe. We'll have minutes to escape, if that." Dakhtar nodded grimly. Better that than letting these abominations loose on the galaxy. The next few moments were a blur of frantic action. Zephyr's team rigged the reactor for overload while the rest provided covering fire. As the facility began to shake apart around them, Dakhtar led the mad dash for their extraction point. "Sir," Dakhtar concluded, his voice hoarse, "we need to hit their supply lines now before they can produce more of these monstrosities." Vrath studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well, Cadet. I'm authorizing a full-scale assault." He paused, mandibles twitching in what might have been a smile. "And you'll be leading the charge." As Dakhtar left the Admiral's office, his mind was already racing with plans. The full might of the Kroth war machine was bearing down on them, but they would meet it with a new breed of warrior, one forged in the crucible of human savagery and alien discipline. Dakhtar's augmented body hummed with terrifying energy as he strode onto the bridge of the assault carrier, Retribution. The ship's crew snapped to attention, a mix of awe and fear in their eyes as they beheld the cyborg commander. "At ease," he growled, his voice a metallic rasp. "Status report." Captain Lyra, a battle-hardened Andorian, brought up a holographic display of the sector. "Strike teams are in position, sir, awaiting your command." Dakhtar's cybernetic eye whirred as he analyzed the tactical overlay. "Commence Operation Shattered Spine." Across multiple star systems, the Ganra Khatri Vindicators sprang into action. On Gartan IV, Vara's team infiltrated the sprawling dilithium refinery complex. Disguised as slave laborers, they blended seamlessly with the downtrodden masses toiling under Kroth oppression. "Remember," Vara whispered to her squad, "we wait for peak production hours, maximum chaos." Kroth overseers scrambled to contain the uprising, only to find themselves outmatched by Vara's precision strikes. As alarms blared, an unexpected ally emerged, robed figures chanting in an alien tongue. Vara's tactical mind raced, adapting to this new variable. She directed her team to funnel the zealots' fervor, using their religious fury as a battering ram against Kroth's strongpoints. Dilithium refineries blazed, production lines ground to a halt. Vara allowed herself a grim smile as she watched the facility's master control center erupt in flames. "Commence diversionary strikes," Zephyr ordered, his voice cool and collected. Hit-and-run attacks blossomed across the shipyard's outer defensive grid. Kroth commanders, their hive-mind tactics ill-suited for such fragmented warfare, frantically redeployed their forces to meet the threat. "Breach teams, go loud!" Murphy roared as they crashed through airlocks and service corridors. Hand-to-hand combat erupted throughout the shipyard. Human savagery met Kroth biological weapons in a symphony of violence. Murphy's troops fought with a ferocity that left even their alien allies in awe. Zephyr coordinated from the central hub, directing sabotage efforts with surgical precision. One by one, construction gantries sparked and died, crippling the Kroth's ability to produce capital ships. "Initiate Operation Phantom Plague," Dakhtar commanded. His cyber warfare specialists injected false attack telemetry into Kroth systems, simulating a devastating bioweapon strike. Alarms blared as the facility initiated emergency quarantine protocols. In the ensuing confusion, Dakhtar's strike force breached the outer perimeter. They fought their way inward, a relentless tide of retribution. A Kroth barrage caught Dakhtar in the open. His augmented body absorbed punishment that would have vaporized an unmodified being, but even he had limits. Internal diagnostics flashed critical warnings as he stumbled. Kroth guards rallied, unleashing waves of half-formed clone monstrosities. Daktar's team set explosive charges even as they fought for their lives, the air filled with the stench of burnt flesh and ozone. "Charges set!" Zephyr shouted over the din of battle. "We need to move!" As Croth claws reached for him, Daktar thumbed the trigger. The world erupted in cleansing fire. Days later, Daktar stood before Admiral Vrath, his body a patchwork of fresh synth flesh and new cybernetics. The casualties had been grievous, but the results undeniable. Across Alliance space, tales of the Ganra Khatri's exploits spread like wildfire. Recruitment centers overflowed with volunteers eager to learn the ways of controlled savagery. Daktar gazed out at the stars, his cybernetic eyes scanning threat assessments. The Croth would regroup, adapt. This was but a single battle in a war that threatened to consume the galaxy. He flexed his new bionic arm, feeling the raw power thrumming beneath the surface. The scholar he once was would have recoiled at the being he'd become, but that Daktar was a relic of a gentler age. A chime at the door broke his reverie. Admiral Vrath entered, mandibles twitching in what passed for a Thracian smile. "Your exploits continue to impress, Daktar," Vrath rumbled. "The Alliance Council has authorized a new offensive. I want you at its head." "Not a target. Targets." Vrath's compound eyes glittered. "We're hitting the Croth reinforcement convoys. Deep interdiction strikes to blunt their frontier push." "There is one condition," Vrath continued, his tone growing cautious. "The Tal Shiar have insisted on oversight." A cold dread settled in Daktar's gut. He'd heard whispers of the enigmatic intelligence agency, their methods as ruthless as they were inscrutable. The door slid open again, admitting a lithe figure swathed in shadows. As she stepped into the light, Daktar's breath caught. Alabaster skin, eyes of liquid obsidian, and hair like spun starlight, the Tal Shiar operative was equal parts alluring and lethal. Ryla's gaze swept over Daktar, coolly assessing. "I've studied your tactics, Vindicator. Effective if crude." "At what cost?" Ryla's voice was silk over steel. "The Tal Shiar's role is to ensure precision, minimize collateral damage." As Daktar strode from the briefing room, his augmented senses picked up Ryla's whisper. "This will be interesting." Days later, Daktar's strike force emerged from slip space above Kelder Prime. A Croth armada hung in high orbit, disgorging troop transports to reinforce their ground assault. "All units, execute Plan Thunderstrike," Daktar barked into the fleet comm. Daktar led from the front, his augmented body shrugging off punishment that would have vaporized an unmodified soldier. His integrated weapons sang a song of destruction as Croth warriors fell before him. "Belay that strike!" Ryla's voice cut through the battle haze. "Friendly forces are still in the target zone." Daktar snarled in frustration, watching as a prime opportunity slipped away. "We can't afford to hesitate. Push the attack!" The clash of philosophies played out across a dozen engagements. Ryla's meticulous planning clashed with Daktar's savage instincts. Alliance casualties decreased, but so too did the tempo of their advance. Then came Kelter Prime. The Croth unveiled their latest atrocity, hyper-augmented shock legions that shrugged off conventional firepower. Worse still, they wielded some kind of mutagenic bioweapon that transformed any life form into a pseudo-Croth abomination. Daktar watched in horror as the monstrosities tore through his lines. Vindicators fell, only to rise again as frothing, chitinous horrors. The comm channels filled with screams and desperate pleas. "Fall back!" Daktar roared, his voice cracking. "All units, emergency evac!" Just as all seemed lost, a shimmering barrier of energy materialized around the remaining Alliance forces. Ryla stood at its center, eyes blazing with eldritch power, hands weaving complex patterns in the air. "Containment protocols engaged," she intoned, her voice oddly doubled. "Prepare for emergency extraction." He clenched his metallic fist, feeling the raw power thrumming beneath the surface. They couldn't afford restraint, not against an enemy as ruthless as the Croth. Maximum aggression was the only path to victory. Ryla's voice cut through his brooding. "Your Vindicators are a liability, Daktar. Their lack of discipline will be our undoing. And how many more will die for your crusade? Ryla's words dripped with disdain. How much collateral damage is acceptable in your grand strategy? Daktar turned away first, his voice a low growl. Prepare for the next deployment. I'll brief the strike teams. As he strode from the command center, Daktar's mind raced. He would prove the worth of his vindicators, with or without Ryla's approval. The Kroth would learn to fear the name Ganra Khatri, no matter the consequences. Another civilian transport lost, he growled, slamming his metallic fist onto the holo display. How many more must die before we unleash our full strength? Ryla's cool voice cut through his fury. We cannot abandon our principles, Daktar. That way lies madness. Admiral Vrath's hologram materialized, mandibles clicking in agitation. Daktar, you are hereby relieved of command. The Vindicators are to stand down immediately. What? Daktar snarled, his organic eye widening in disbelief. Evidence of war crimes has come to light, Vrath continued, his compound eyes glittering coldly. The Alliance cannot condone such actions. Ryla stepped forward, her hand hovering near a concealed weapon. Don't do this, Daktar. It's over. With lightning speed, Daktar's arm shot out, striking a hidden panel. Blast doors slammed shut, sealing off the command center. No, he growled. It's just beginning. Chaos erupted. Loyal Vindicators drew weapons, subduing those who hesitated. Ryla vanished in a shimmer of cloaking technology, but Daktar paid her no mind. He strode to the main console, fingers flying across the interface. Brothers and sisters, his voice boomed across the comms, reaching every Vindicator cell across Alliance space. The weak have betrayed us, but we will not abandon our sacred duty. From this day forward, we are the Ganra Kodori, the Savage Brotherhood. Across a dozen systems, Vindicator strike teams sprang into action. Munitions depots fell to precision raids. Warships were seized in daring boarding actions. The Kodori's ranks swelled with those who shared Daktar's conviction, a conviction born of desperation and rage. He turned to see Ryla, her stealth field shimmering as she materialized. Her eyes blazed with eldritch power, hands weaving intricate patterns in the air. Stand down, she commanded, her voice resonating with otherworldly authority. This is your final warning. Daktar's response was a burst of plasma fire from his integrated weapons. Ryla deflected the barrage with a shimmering energy barrier, her own assault scything through Daktar's honor guard. The two clashed in a fury of augmented strength and alien sorcery. Bulkheads buckled under the force of their blows. Daktar's cybernetics screamed warnings as Ryla's energy bolts found their mark. You're throwing everything away, Ryla shouted, her voice thick with frustration and something deeper, regret. Is this truly what you've become? Daktar faltered, his organic eye reflecting a moment of anguish. In that instant of hesitation, Ryla struck. A crackling burst of energy tore through his defenses, ravaging flesh and circuitry alike. Alarms blared in Daktar's skull as system after system went critical. He staggered, collapsing against a shattered bulkhead. Through the haze of pain, he saw his remaining forces pulling back, dragging him to safety. Fire! As the Kodori's infamy grew, so too did the whispers. Crime syndicates and rival factions sought their services, offering riches and technology in exchange for deniable strikes against their enemies. Daktar accepted their patronage without qualm. Resources were resources, and every fallen foe brought them one step closer to galactic salvation. But in the quiet moments between battles, doubt gnawed at him. The scholar he had once been recoiled at the monster he'd become, yet he pushed those thoughts aside, burying them beneath layers of cold pragmatism. The hunt intensified. Zephyr and his team systematically dismantled Kodori cells across the frontier. Brian Murphy, once Daktar's protege, now led human marines in grim pursuit of their former mentor. This isn't you, Daktar, she implored. You were a teacher, a protector, not this. I am what I must be, he intoned, his integrated weapons humming to life. Vara's scream of betrayal echoed through the abandoned facility as Daktar's assault left her broken and maimed. He strode away, forcibly suppressing the part of him that howled in anguish at what he had done. The Ganra Kodori's crusade continued, leaving devastation in its wake. But with each passing day, the line between righteous fury and monstrous savagery blurred further. Daktar's mind fractured, caught between the ruthless logic of his augmentations and the withering core of his alien ethics. The freighter's detonation ripped through Rygofa's atmosphere, a miniature sun blooming against the mining world's twilight sky. Daktar watched the feed from his command center, cybernetic eye recording every detail of the devastation. "Confirmed hit on Croth Logistics Hub," a subordinate reported. "But sir, the blast radius..." Daktar's organic eye narrowed as the full scope of destruction became clear. The adjacent civilian colony, a sprawling complex of prefab structures and makeshift dwellings, had been reduced to ash and twisted metal. "Acceptable losses," he growled, silencing the murmurs of disquiet among his crew. The Croth understand only one language. But as the hours passed and reports flooded in, even Daktar's cold logic struggled to justify the carnage. Thousands of civilians, miners, engineers, families, had been vaporized in an instant. The comm channels, usually filled with status updates and tactical data, now echoed with anguished voices. "This isn't what we signed up for," a grizzled Vindicator veteran muttered, tossing his insignia onto the briefing room table. "We're supposed to be protecting people, not this." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Daktar alone with the ghostly afterimage. For a brief moment, something akin to remorse flickered across his face. Then his cybernetics reasserted control, pushing such weakness aside. "Sir," a communications officer interrupted, her voice hesitant. "We're picking up encrypted Alliance transmissions. It's not good." Daktar's fist clenched as he processed the intel. The War Council's verdict was clear. The Kodori were to be hunted down and eliminated with extreme prejudice. Admiral Vrath's hologram materialized, his mandibles clicking with terrifying fury as he addressed the assembled fleet. "The Ganra Kodori are no longer misguided allies," Vrath declared. "They are a cancer that must be excised for the good of all sentient life. You have full authorization to use whatever means necessary to neutralize this threat." Visions of devastation and triumph danced before him. The screams of the innocent on Rygo 5 echoed in his mind, but they were drowned out by the roar of righteous fury. The Croth, the Alliance, all those who stood in the way of true galactic salvation, they would burn. Daktar's organic eye snapped open, blazing with terrible purpose. He strode to a holo display, fingers dancing across the interface as he plotted a course to an abandoned asteroid mining facility on the fringes of known space. "If they want a monster," he growled, "I'll give them one they'll never forget." In the depths of space, where even starlight struggled to penetrate, Daktar's plan took shape. The endgame approached, and with it, the promise of a victory that would leave nothing but ashes in its wake. "Evasive maneuvers," Zephyr barked, his cybernetic reflexes kicking into overdrive. The team's ships corkscrewed through space, energy weapons lashing out at the incoming threats. Inside the facility, Daktar's organic eye gleamed with savage satisfaction. "Initiate launch sequence," he commanded, his voice a cold rasp. The asteroid shuddered as makeshift railguns powered up. Hardened slugs, their cores seething with geminous strain infectants, rocketed towards distant worlds. Similar scenes played out across a dozen worlds. The strain spread like wildfire, transforming populations into monstrous hybrids. Cities devolved into abattoirs as the newly birthed Praxis brood tore through anything still human. Admiral Vrath's compound eyes flickered with revulsion as he watched the feeds. Evacuation efforts faltered in the face of the growing horde. He opened a channel to the War Council, mandibles clicking in agitation. "We have no choice," he declared. "Initiate orbital strikes. We must contain the contagion at all." "Behold the future of our species, Admiral," Daktar's augmented voice boomed. "Bow before the Kodori, or watch as your precious alliance is consumed." In his command center, Daktar sank into a nutrient bath, crackling with bioelectric energy. As the strange reworked his flesh, his consciousness expanded. He felt the hunger of the brood, their singular purpose. His organic eye rolled back, revealing only milky white as a tendril of alien matter snaked from his temple. It pulsed in time with distant heartbeats, each throb a symphony of conquest. "We are one," Daktar whispered, his voice a chorus of countless throats. "And we will remake this galaxy in our image." On Colony 12, Vara crouched in a maintenance tunnel, her cybernetic eye scanning for Kodori patrols. The acrid stench of ozone and decay filled her nostrils. She tapped her comlink, voice barely above a whisper. "Team Alpha, status report." "Charges set on the processing hub," came the reply. "Awaiting your signal." Vara allowed herself a grim smile. Months of meticulous planning had led to this moment. With practiced precision, she keyed in the detonation sequence. In the command center, a Kodori lieutenant stared in disbelief at the security feeds. "How did they—" His words were cut short as a rebel's plasma round tore through his chest. Vara strode into the room, her cybernetic eye glowing with cold fury. News of the uprising spread like wildfire through clandestine networks. On a dozen worlds, underground cells intensified their efforts. Saboteurs struck strain, processing hubs. Guerrilla fighters ambushed Kodori patrols, and encrypted transmissions carried whispers of hope. On New Vega, a sprawling metropolis choked with strange spores. Civilians huddled in makeshift shelters as Kroth dropships screamed overhead. Kodori defenders returned fire, their energy weapons carving swathes of destruction through residential blocks. But there would be no salvation. As Kroth shock troops pushed deeper into the city, Kodori commanders made a cold calculation. They released a weaponized strain variant, caring little for collateral damage. In his fortress on Novus Prime, Daktar observed the carnage with detached interest. His organic components had been further subsumed by pulsing alien growths. When he spoke, it was with the voice of Legion. "The weak fall away," he intoned. "Only through unity will we achieve perfection." Daktar's cybernetic eye flashed crimson. With lightning speed, a tendril lashed out, impaling the messenger. As the body crumpled, Daktar's organic eye narrowed. "Summon Charn," he commanded. "It is time to purge the non-believers." On Tangar, he made his gruesome debut. Rebel sympathizers were rounded up, promised amnesty if they surrendered peacefully. As the captives gathered in the town square, relief palpable on their faces, Charn sprung his trap. Searing plasma rained down from concealed emplacements. Men, women, and children alike were cut down in a hail of indiscriminate fire. Charn's laughter rang out over the screams of the dying. "Let this be a lesson," he bellowed, his augmented voice carrying for miles. "There is no mercy for traitors, only obedience or annihilation." The words had barely left his lips when proximity alarms shrieked to life. Kodori ships breached the atmosphere, their weapons already charging. Panic erupted as civilians scrambled for safety. The first salvo struck, and the very air seemed to ignite. Strain-laced projectiles burst in nightmarish blooms, unleashing a biological hellstorm. Zephyr watched in horror as evacuees contorted in agony, their bodies twisting into monstrous new forms. The mutations spread like wildfire, each victim becoming a vector for further infection. "We can't save them," his second-in-command shouted over the din. "Sir, we have to go." What followed was a nightmare of fire and blood. Zephyr's commandos cut down former allies and enemies alike, reduced to howling abominations by the strain. Entire city blocks were obliterated in desperate attempts to halt the spread. As the last transport lifted off, Zephyr stared at the burning remains of Kalden. The cost of their escape greatly troubled upon him. How many innocents had they sacrificed? How much further could they push before becoming the very monsters they fought? The hyperspace jump faded, leaving Zephyr's ship adrift in the inky void. His crew moved with grim efficiency, tending to the wounded and running diagnostics. In the cramped med bay, Zephyr stared at his reflection in a polished bulkhead. Haunted eyes gazed back, etched with the weight of impossible choices. The word sent a chill down Zephyr's spine. He leaned forward, cybernetic implants whirring as they processed the implications. "Explain." Zephyr's fists clenched. And the praxis purges? A smokescreen, Vrath replied, his voice heavy. We believe he's attempting to distill the very essence of human savagery, fusing it with alien biotech. The potential threat is incalculable. As Vrath outlined the situation, Zephyr felt a familiar fire ignite within him. A chance to end this madness, once and for all. I'm sending coordinates, Vrath continued. Rendezvous with Vera's team. You'll be joined by Commander Eldrin and a contingent of Marines. This may be our only shot. All hands prepare for combat drop. We're going after Daktar. Corporal Murphy's Marines spearheaded the frontal assault, their armor scorched and pitted as they pushed ever deeper into the facility. The air crackled with ozone and the acrid stench of burning flesh. Vara materialized at Zephyr's side, her stealth field shimmering as it deactivated. We've breached the inner sanctum, she reported, voice tight with tension. But something's wrong. Defensive positions, Zephyr barked, his cybernetic eye scanning for threats. What emerged from the shadows defied description, writhing masses of flesh and metal, bearing twisted echoes of human features. They moved with terrible purpose, each abomination spawning swarms of smaller attack drones. By the stars, Murphy breathed, his rifle trembling in his grip. What has he done? The battle devolved into a nightmare of close-quarters combat. Vara's blades flashed, carving through mutated flesh. Zephyr's hunters fought with desperate ferocity, but for every monstrosity they felled, two more took its place. Commander Eldrin's voice crackled over the comm, strained and filled with static. Fall back! I'm initiating the purge protocol. Zephyr hesitated, unwilling to abandon their mission. But as he watched another Marine fall, overwhelmed by a tide of chittering drones, he made the call. What did you find? He asked Vara, gesturing to the core. Her eyes met his, filled with a mix of horror and grim drive. The truth, she replied. And it's worse than we could have imagined. As the ships rocketed away from the dying world, Zephyr knew their war had entered a new phase. Daktar's mad ambition threatened not just their galaxy, but the very fabric of reality itself. In the darkness of space, humanity's savage potential loomed like a gathering storm, and the xenocrats, those who had once seen themselves as humanity's shepherds, now found their fate inexorably linked to the species they had sought to control. The data core pulsed with ominous possibility, a window into Daktar's twisted vision. As Vara began her analysis, Zephyr steeled himself for the battles to come. The true test of humanity's spirit lay ahead, and the cost of failure was nothing less than the soul of the universe itself. Vara's fingers flew across the holographic interface, decrypting the data core's contents. Her eyes widened as the truth unfolded before her. Zephyr, you need to see this, she called, voice tight with urgency. The implications were staggering. Humanity's savage potential, harnessed and twisted by Daktar's mad ambition, threatened to unravel the very fabric of existence. The stakes had risen beyond mere galactic domination. We need help, Vara declared, her tone brooking no argument. There's only one force with the knowledge to combat this level of metaphysical threat. Hours later, their ship docked at a hidden station deep in neutral space. Vara and Commander Eldrin, grim-faced and heavily armed, made their way through sterile corridors to the heart of the xenocratic stronghold. The chamber they entered pulsed with bioluminescent energy. Towering figures, more light than substance, regarded the humans with inscrutable gazes. You seek the wisdom of the Vrillion, one intoned, its voice resonating directly in their minds. Enter, another Vrillion gestured, a portal of swirling energy coalescing before them. But be warned, the truths you seek may shatter your very concept of existence. Vara and Eldrin exchanged a determined look before plunging into the datasphere. Their consciousness expanded, merging with vast rivers of information. Simulations of possible futures flashed by at dizzying speed. Eldrin's mental voice echoed with despair. There's no stopping it. The only way to prevent this is... No, Vara cut him off, her will razor-sharp even in this realm of pure thought. I refuse to accept genocide as the answer. A glimmer of hope emerged. Daktar's consciousness, in its manic evolution, was destabilizing. As it pushed beyond comprehensible limits, it became vulnerable to paradox. Vara latched onto this weakness, formulating a desperate plan. They would need to strike at the very core of Daktar's being, using his own past against him. They emerged from the portal, gasping and disoriented. The Vrillion regarded them with something akin to pity. Vara nodded, her face set with iron will. "We have a chance, but we'll need to infiltrate the homeworld itself." The ship's engines flared to life, propelling them toward humanity's birthplace in the final confrontation with Daktar's madness. As stars streaked by, Vara clutched the data core containing the key to their daring plan. "Cadet Zephyr, report to Simulation Chamber 3, a voice crackled over the intercom. In the simulation chamber, he found Vara calibrating a holoprojector. She looked up, her expression neutral. "Ready for the tactical exercise?" "Vara, do you—" he began, then faltered. How could he explain? "Never mind, let's begin." Later in the mess hall, Zephyr's attention was drawn to a heated discussion at a nearby table. He recognized the booming voice of Corporal Murphy, currently just another brash cadet. "That's enough, cadet," an instructor interrupted. "Your reckless attitude has no place here." As the instructor walked away, Zephyr noticed Daktar observing the exchange with keen interest. The alien's eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. One evening, Vara cornered him after classes. "Something's not right with Daktar," she said, her voice low. "Have you noticed how he's changed?" Zephyr nodded, choosing his words carefully. "I've seen it, but maybe it's not all bad." Vara's eyes widened in surprise, but before she could respond, alarms blared throughout the academy. Cadets rushed to defensive positions as reports flooded in of an attack by a group calling themselves the Vrokashar Orthodoxy. As explosions rocked the campus, Zephyr found himself slipping into a combat mindset honed by years of warfare he had never actually experienced. He barked orders, coordinating a defense that felt both foreign and deeply ingrained. In the chaos, he caught sight of Daktar. The alien moved with lethal efficiency, his acolytes following suit. Their actions were effective but crossed lines of accepted combat doctrine, leaving a trail of brutalized attackers in their wake. The battle raged into the night. When the smoke cleared, the academy stood divided. Factions formed, with lines drawn between traditionalists and those who saw the need for a more aggressive approach. As they fortified their position, news reached them of a Kroth attack on an allied colony. The reports were grim. Bioweapons unleashed, civilians twisted into monstrous forms. The horror was achingly familiar to Zephyr. Zephyr hesitated, knowing the precipice they stood upon, but the memory of burning worlds and shattered realities steeled his dedication. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. As Zephyr reached for the crystal, he felt the universe tremble on the edge of a knife. The path before them was fraught with danger, but the alternative was unthinkable. Alarms blared across the academy, shattering the tense silence. Zephyr's comm unit crackled to life. "Xenocratic mold detected. All units, execute Protocol Omega." Zephyr nodded, his battle-honed instincts taking over. "Vara, Murphy, gather the strike teams. We move on the munitions depots immediately." Meanwhile, Brian's shock troops breached the security hubs. The sounds of precision explosives and close quarters combat echoed through the station. "Security nexus neutralized," Brian reported. "We've got full access to internal systems." From his concealed command bunker, Daktar coordinated the uprising with cold pragmatism. Holographic displays flickered around him, showcasing the rapid fall of key facilities. "Deploying adaptive drone swarms," he announced. "Keep the loyalists pinned down." Hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Zephyr stood in the reactor core chamber, surrounded by his militia. Daktar's voice echoed through the station-wide comm system. True to her prediction, the sky above the academy lit up with explosions as Eldrin's ships were ambushed by kamikaze drones. Vara watched the tactical readouts, her mind racing. "Wait," she muttered. "I've seen this before." On the main view screen, They watched as Eldrin's remaining ships executed a series of unpredictable maneuvers, evading the relentless drone pursuit. The survivors limped towards a fortified bunker manned by Zephyr's forces. "They'll be trapped there," Murphy growled. "We should finish them off." Zephyr hesitated, memories of a future that never was flashing through his mind. "No," he decided. "We hold position. Let them stew in their failure." Daktar's eyes gleamed with predatory anticipation. "Perhaps not, but this presents an opportunity we cannot ignore." As Kozlov's ship docked, Zephyr felt the weight of history pressing down upon him. The choices made in the next few hours would shape the future of not just the Academy, but the entire galaxy. He steeled himself for what was to come, knowing that the true test of his perseverance lay ahead. "So this is what it's come to," Kozlov said, his voice infused with disgust. "Cadets playing at Revolution." Doctor stepped forward, eyes gleaming. "This is no game, Admiral. The future of our species hangs in the balance." "You leave me no choice," the Admiral said, his shoulders sagging. "To prevent further bloodshed, I hereby cede control of this station and its surrounding systems to your administration." "We've secured the Proxima and Centauri sectors," Vara reported, her fingers dancing across a holographic display. "But we're seeing resistance in the Tau Ceti colonies." As he spoke, a priority alert flashed across the screen. Reports flooded in of Kroth ships massing along the Orion Arm, poised to reclaim lost territory. Daktar's voice crackled over the comm. "You know what must be done, generals. Show them the full might of human warfare." "General," a junior officer reported, "we've intercepted a transmission from Commander Eldrin's forces. It seems they've gone rogue, sir. They're rallying dissidents across multiple sectors." Zephyr's mind focused. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this. "Inform High Command. We'll deal with this insurrection ourselves." As he turned to leave, another alert flashed across his neural link. Security footage from a nearby outpost showed a familiar face. Brian Murphy, his former mentor, gunning down Vindicator enforcers. "What are you doing, old friend?" Zephyr muttered, a cold dread settling in his stomach. The door to the bridge slid open, revealing Daktar. The alien's eyes burned with an intensity that sent a shiver down Zephyr's spine. "Walk with me, General," Daktar commanded. "We have much to discuss about the future of our campaign." As they strode through the corridors of the ship, Zephyr couldn't shake the feeling that events were spiraling beyond his control. The weight of countless lives lost pressed down upon him, threatening to crack his dedication. "We must strike harder, faster," Daktar hissed, his eyes glowing with fervor. "The humans' most devastating weapons. We will unleash them all." Before Zephyr could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. A lieutenant's voice crackled over the comms. "General, we've lost contact with Outpost Sigma. Reports of heavy Kroth activity in the sector." Zephyr's fist tight. Another system lost. The Kroth were advancing faster than they could fortify their positions. He turned to Daktar, seeing the same grim realization in the alien's eyes. As the dust settled, Zephyr received the after-action report. Outpost Sigma was secure but at a terrible cost. Thousands of human colonists had been caught in the crossfire, their bodies littering the streets alongside Kroth corpses. Vara's hologram flickered to life on the bridge. Her face was etched with concern. "Zephyr, we need to talk. This level of collateral damage, it's not sustainable." Before he could reply, another alert flashed across his neural link. Security footage from a nearby system showed Brian Murphy leading a group of human Marines in an assault on a Vindicator command post. The ease with which they breached the defenses spoke of insider knowledge. Zephyr's fists clenched. "Vara, we'll discuss this later. We have a bigger problem." He pulled up a galactic map, red indicators flashing across multiple sectors. Eldrin's insurgency was growing, striking at key installations with increasing boldness. And now, with Brian joining their ranks, the threat had become even more dire. "Daktar," Zephyr called out, "we need to contain this rebellion before it spreads further." The alien leader's eyes gleamed with a predatory light. "Then we will make an example of them. Deploy the Ganra Vindicators. Show them the true meaning of human warfare." Little did Zephyr know, His actions were about to set in motion a chain of events that would shatter the fragile alliance he had helped forge. As Vindicator forces prepared for their next brutal assault, the seeds of rebellion were taking root within their own ranks. The galaxy burned. "General," a communications officer called out, "we've lost contact with Outpost Theta. It's gone dark." Moments later, the view screen lit up with blinding flashes. Orbital strikes rained down on Theta, vaporizing vast swathes of the planet's surface. Millions of lives snuffed out in an instant, human and Kroth alike. Vara's face appeared on a secondary display, her features twisted with disgust. "You've become everything we swore to fight against, Zephyr." Zephyr's shuttle touched down at the facility hours later. The moment he stepped inside, he knew something was wrong. The halls were eerily silent, devoid of the usual bustle of activity. He drew his sidearm, advancing cautiously. The control room was a charnel house. Bodies of Vindicator personnel lay strewn about, their throats slit with surgical precision. A single figure stood hunched over a console, furiously downloading data. "Brian," Zephyr called out, his weapon trained on his former mentor. Murphy turned, his eyes burning with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "You don't have to do this, kid. It's not too late to walk away." For a moment, Zephyr hesitated, then his neural link chirped. Another Kroth incursion detected. His commitment hardened. "You're wrong. It's been too late for a long time. We will show them the true meaning of human warfare," Daktar hissed. "Deploy the bioweapons." Zephyr's blood ran cold as he processed the implications, but he nodded, issuing the necessary commands. He had come too far to turn back now. "This is what your precious human warfare has wrought," she snarled, her voice distorted. "We will tear down everything you've built, Zephyr, despite the toll." As the transmission cut out, proximity alarms blared throughout the command center. A massive Kroth fleet had just dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons primed and ready to strike. Zephyr stood at the precipice, the weight of countless atrocities pressing down upon him. The final confrontation loomed, promising a maelstrom of violence unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And as he gazed out at the oncoming storm, he knew that the true test of human savagery was yet to come. The Kroth fleet loomed large in the view screen, a writhing mass of biomechanical horror. Zephyr's fingers flew across the tactical interface, coordinating defensive measures. But even as he issued orders, a sinking feeling grew in his gut. This wasn't just another incursion. It was the beginning of something far worse. "Sir!" A panicked voice cut through the chaos. "We're detecting multiple breaches in sectors 7 through 12. They're inside the station." Zephyr's blood ran cold. He pulled up internal security feeds, watching in horror as Kroth warriors poured through holes in the hull. But something was off about their movements, their coordination. It was almost as if his thoughts were interrupted by a priority transmission. Daktar's face filled the screen, his eyes burning with a mixture of rage and triumph. "You see now, General?" the alien hissed. "This is the true face of human warfare. Betrayal, chaos, the strong devouring the weak." "This is what we've become," Zephyr muttered, watching recordings of Purger atrocities. His hands shook as he issued orders for yet another scorched earth offensive. Before he could formulate a response, another transmission cut through the noise. Brian Murphy's face filled the screen, older and more haggard than Zephyr remembered. "You've gone too far, kid." Murphy's voice was thick with disappointment. "We're going to put an end to this madness one way or another." The feed cut out, replaced by tactical readouts of precision bombing, runs against loyalist strongholds. Zephyr's mind raced, struggling to counter moves he himself had once taught his mentor. Days later, Zephyr found himself leading a Purger battalion against a resistance-held world. The battle was brutal, his troops cutting through defensive lines with inhuman savagery. As he pushed towards the command center, a familiar figure appeared in his crosshairs. "Vara!" As he signaled for her capture, a cold dread settled in his stomach. He knew what Daktar would do with such a prize. Zephyr stood at attention, his face an emotionless mask, as Daktar addressed the assembled crowd. On a raised platform before them, Vara knelt, battered but defiant. Zephyr pored over intelligence reports, a growing sense of unease gnawing at him. The pattern of Croth expansion was too precise, too calculated. It was almost as if his blood ran cold as he uncovered the final piece of the puzzle. Encrypted communications, strategic data, all pointing to a high-ranking Vindicator advisor feeding information directly to the Croth. The betrayal went deeper than he could have imagined. "Played us like pawns, Clevera," Daktar's voice thundered. How long have you been feeding intelligence to the Croth?" A cold, feminine laugh sent chills down Zephyr's spine. "Oh, Daktar, you simple, violent creature. I haven't been feeding intelligence to the Croth. I am the Croth." Zephyr's mind reeled. He activated his neural link, frantically compiling the evidence he'd gathered. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a scene of barely held-back fury. Doctor loomed over Clavura, his massive frame trembling with rage. The alien advisor stood calmly, a triumphant smirk playing across her features. "Ah, General Zephyr," Clavura purred. "How fitting you should join us for the grand finale." "We know," Daktar growled. "She's just confessed to being a deep-cover Croth operative." Clavura's form shimmered, biomechanical implants rippling beneath her skin. "Not just any operative. I represent the true heart of Croth High Command. We who understand that to conquer humanity, we must become them." A series of high-pitched tones emanated from Clavura's cybernetic implants. Zephyr's tactical overlay exploded with alerts, Croth signatures dropping out of slipspace across multiple sectors. Daktar roared, lunging at his former advisor. Clavura's movements blurred, inhumanly fast. Her arm elongated, morphing into a vicious blade that sliced across Daktar's chest. A psychic pulse slammed into Zephyr, driving him to his knees. Clavura's voice echoed in his mind, taunting and alien. He fought through the disorientation, raising his sidearm. Zephyr stood, his lips pursed. There would be time to mourn later. For now, he had a war to fight. Hours bled into days as Zephyr coordinated what remained of the Vindicator forces. Their guerrilla tactics and asymmetric warfare training proved devastatingly effective in the opening stages of the conflict. But the Croth numbers were overwhelming, their attacks relentless. Exhausted and bloodied, Zephyr watched another defensive line crumble beneath the alien onslaught. The Croth moved with terrifying efficiency, purging entire settlements with cold, mechanical precision. Amidst the carnage, a new signature appeared on Zephyr's tactical display. His eyes widened in a disbelief as he processed the readings. It couldn't be. "This is Daktar," the alien's voice boomed across all frequencies. "All remaining Vindicator forces converge on my position. Today, we show the Croth the true meaning of human savagery." The mutant strike force carved a bloody swathe through the Croth armada. Their suicidal fury seemed to unnerve even the disciplined alien warriors, creating openings for Murphy's resistance fighters to exploit. The implications staggered him. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a civil war. With grim resignation, Zephyr opened a channel to Murphy and Daktar. The time had come for unlikely alliances. As the three leaders conferred, a new strategy took shape, one born of desperation and the understanding that sometimes the enemy of your enemy is your only hope for survival. Zephyr's neural link crackled with static as the transmission ended. He blinked, processing the implications of this unlikely alliance. Across the tactical display, Croth signatures shifted, their patterns morphing into something new and terrifying. Zephyr leaned forward, studying the holographic readouts. "Clavura's forces," he muttered. "They're purging their own ranks." Hours later, Zephyr found himself aboard Daktar's command vessel, surrounded by the monstrous hybrid warriors that had once been his enemies. The stench of chemicals and raw aggression permeated the air. "The bait is set," Eldrin's voice rang out. On the main view screen, a seemingly undefended systemoid hung in the void, surrounded by a glittering field of mines. Daktar growled, his massive form hunched over a tactical station. "Clavura won't be able to resist. Her hunger for dominance will be her undoing." As if on cue, slipspace ruptures tore across the sector. Clavura's armada emerged, a relentless wall of biomechanical terror. "Now!" Zephyr barked. Zephyr's fingers danced across his neural interface. Automated mining rigs, dormant attack drones, even navigation buoys, all sprang to life. A chaotic barrage of weaponized debris pelted Klavira's ships, catching them in a deadly crossfire. On the main view screen, Dakatar's mutant shock troops launched, latching onto crippled Kroth vessels. The sounds of close-quarters combat filled the command frequency. Zephyr watched in grim fascination as the Resistance fighters' nimble craft wove through the debris field. They reached Klavira's command ship, docking with practiced efficiency. What followed was a blur of violence. Klavira's cybernetic enhancements allowed her to seize control of entire sections of the ship, but Murphy and Daktar pressed forward. In a high-stakes endeavor, they managed to graft components from fallen Kroth lieutenants onto their own bodies. Daktar's voice, strained and distorted, echoed across the comm. "Now, Zephyr! Do it now!" Zephyr's scans showed 3 life signs: Daktar, Murphy, and Klavira herself, plummeting away from the doomed vessel. As the energy storm subsided, new signatures appeared on Zephyr's tactical display. Eldrin's Resistance fighters emerged from hidden redoubts, joined by Kroth? He blinked, confirming the readings. Kroth turncoats, liberated from Klavira's iron grip, now stood with the human alliance. "We rebuild," Zephyr said, his voice carrying across all frequencies. "We prepare, because when the Kroth Imperium comes to avenge this defeat, we'll be ready." The comm channels erupted with a cacophony of human and alien voices, united in purpose. As Zephyr began issuing orders, his gaze drifted to the stars beyond the view screen. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Zephyr's eyes remained fixed on the starfield beyond the view screen, his mind racing. The adrenaline of battle faded, replaced by the weight of command. He turned to face the assembled hybrid warriors and Resistance fighters, their expectant gazes boring into him. "Our first priority is recovery," Zephyr announced, his voice steady despite the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. "We need to retrieve Daktar and Murphy's remains from the debris field." Hours later, Zephyr found himself aboard a stealth shuttle, maneuvering through the twisted wreckage of Klavira's flagship. His breath caught as the shuttle's spotlights illuminated a familiar form. "There," he said, pointing to Daktar's massive, ravaged body. As the recovery team brought the fallen leader aboard, Zephyr noticed something unusual. A faint, pulsing glow emanated from Daktar's chest cavity. Upon closer inspection, he discovered a cybernetic symbiont, barely clinging to functionality. "Quarantine this immediately," Zephyr ordered, his voice tense. "And get me our top xenocratic researchers. This thing might hold vital intelligence." Back at the secured enclave, Zephyr paced outside the research lab. The muffled sounds of urgent discussion filtered through the thick walls. When the door finally slid open, the lead researcher's ashen face told him everything he needed to know. Before Zephyr could fully process this information, alarms blared throughout the facility. Commander Eldrin's holographic form materialized before him, her expression grim. Zephyr's mind raced, piecing together the implications. "It's the cult," he said. "They're making their move while we're still reeling from Klavira's attack." He turned to his tactical display, watching as red indicators blossomed across multiple sectors. The Alliance's remaining ships were vastly outnumbered. "Deploy everything we have," Zephyr ordered. "Focus on protecting the interstellar gateways and nodes. We cannot let them get their hands on that technology." As reports of fierce engagements flooded in, Zephyr found himself considering options he never thought possible. The idea of unleashing nuclear volleys against populated systems turned his stomach, but if it meant preventing the cultists from achieving their goals, he pushed the thought aside. There had to be another way. Zephyr opened a channel to the entire Alliance fleet. As acknowledgments poured in from across the fleet, Zephyr turned his attention to the tactical display. The cultists' assault ships were pressing hard against their defensive lines. He knew the real battle was only just beginning. Zephyr's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the tactical readouts. The cultists' assault ships punched through defensive grids with terrifying efficiency. "Orbital defenses breached in sectors 7 through 12, a junior officer reported, voice tight with tension. Zephyr's mind focused. Initiate Protocol Omega. All hands, prepare for scorched earth operations. The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but there was no other choice. Across the system, automated defense platforms erupted in nuclear fire. Entire habitats were reduced to irradiated husks, denying the cult their prize. "Sir," another officer called out, "sleeper cells activating in the outer rim." The tactical display erupted with new threat indicators. Pre-programmed cult assaults overwhelmed critical defense grids. Zephyr watched in horror as key interstellar gateways fell under enemy control. Eldrin nodded sharply, her image dissolving as she moved to execute the order. Zephyr turned his attention back to the main view screen, watching as Allied ships engaged in desperate hit-and-run attacks against the cultist fleet. A priority alert flashed across his neural link. Zephyr's blood ran cold as he processed the information. "No," he whispered. "Sir?" An aide looked at him questioningly. "Eldrin's strike force," Zephyr said, his voice hollow. "Ambushed over Coretus Prime. The antimatter payloads, they're gone." "All forces, fall back to Artigo," he ordered, his voice cutting through the stillness. "We make our stand at the Xenoforges." The response came back terse and professional. "Understood," blades out. Hours later, Zephyr stood in Artigo's primary control nexus, overseeing the frantic fortification efforts. The planet's massive Dyson sphere hummed with redirected energy, powering automated defense grids and hypernova mine clusters. "Incoming!" a sensor operator called out. "Multiple cult fleets converging on our position." "All units, prepare for engagement," Zephyr commanded, his voice steady despite the odds arrayed against them. "This is where we hold the line." The void erupted in furious combat. Robotic leviathans hurled themselves at Artigo's defenses, while Allied walkers and drones fought with desperate valor. Relativistic slugs hammered Zephyr's defensive grids, each impact threatening to shatter their last bastion. "Sir," a communications officer shouted over the din of battle. "Incoming transmission, it's Commander Eldrin." Zephyr's head snapped up as Eldrin's image materialized before him. Her face was a mask of burns and partially regenerated tissue, but her eyes burned with purpose. "We're coming in hot," Eldrin growled. "Get those teleportation pods ready. We're taking the fight to their flagship." As Eldrin's strike force prepared for their audacious assault, Zephyr redirected orbital weapons to provide covering fire. The fate of existence itself hung in the balance as the battle for Artigo reached its fever pitch. Artigo's defenses flashed and buckled under the relentless assault of the cult's forces. Zephyr gripped the edge of the tactical display, his fist clenched as he watched Allied ships crumble under the onslaught. "Eldrin, we're running out of time," he said, his voice tight. "Get your team aboard that flagship now." "General," a voice called out. Zephyr turned to see a Romulan officer approaching, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. "I have a proposal." "Go ahead, Sub-Commander Talara," Zephyr said, recognizing the tactical brilliance that had saved countless lives in previous engagements. Talara outlined her plan, her words precise and measured. As she spoke, Zephyr felt a glimmer of possibility amidst the chaos. It was audacious, desperate, and quite possibly their only chance. "Make it happen," Zephyr ordered, promoting Talara on the spot. "Admiral, you have full authority to coordinate our remaining fleets." As Talara set to work, Zephyr summoned Varlak, a Riansu engineer known for his unconventional tactics. "I need you to design a trap," Zephyr explained, outlining the requirements. Varlak's eyes gleamed with the challenge, and he immediately began calibrating the Dyson sphere's energy output. The command center erupted in a flurry of activity as Zephyr's makeshift plan took shape. Outside, the void blazed with weapons fire as cult ships pressed their advantage. Zephyr's neural link buzzed with constant updates, each one more dire than the last. A priority alert cut through the noise. Eldrin's face appeared on the main screen, her features contorted with pain and urgency. "We've crippled their primary weapons," she reported, the sound of close-quarters combat echoing behind her. "But they're adapting faster than we anticipated. We need that distraction now." Zephyr nodded, signaling his mutant legions to begin their feinted boarding action. He watched as the specially modified transport swarmed towards the cultist flagship, drawing fire and attention away from Eldrin's team. For a moment it seemed to work. The cult's formations wavered, their firing patterns becoming erratic as they struggled to repel the multi-pronged assault. Zephyr allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. The tactical display suddenly warped, indicators skewing wildly as space itself seemed to twist. "Warp corridor overload detected," an officer shouted, his voice barely audible over the blaring alarms. Zephyr watched in horror as hyperspatial shockwaves tore through the battlefield. Allied ships vanished from the display, shunted into fractured slipstreams and scattered across unknown vectors. In moments, their carefully coordinated defense had been shattered. "Status report," Zephyr demanded, his mind racing to salvage the situation. Admiral Talara's voice cut through the chaos, steady and focused. "We've lost cohesion, but our capital ships are still operational. I'm reforming them into a spearhead formation." Zephyr nodded, understanding her intent. "Do it. We'll use the opening to deliver the package." As Talara's remaining ships engaged in a daring maneuver, Zephyr assembled his elite cadre. They worked with practiced efficiency, loading components for the makeshift antimatter lure onto a heavily modified transport. "This is our last shot," Zephyr told them, his voice low and intense. "Get that lure to the Dyson sphere. We'll only have one chance to trigger the singularity." Zephyr watched the transport's progress with suspenseful pause, acutely aware of the rapidly closing window of opportunity. The Dyson sphere loomed ahead, its partially charged matrix humming with latent energy. The transport juked hard, narrowly avoiding a devastating barrage, but the evasive maneuver sent it tumbling off course, its precious cargo in danger of missing the crucial activation point. Zephyr's mind raced, searching for a solution as the cult's forces closed in around them. The fate of existence itself hung in the balance, with mere moments left to act. Zephyr's eyes widened as the transport veered off course, its precious cargo tumbling away from the Dyson sphere's activation point. In that moment, he knew their plan had failed. "Abort mission," he barked into the comm. "All units disengage and prepare for emergency retreat." The command center erupted into frantic activity as Zephyr's order rippled across the battlefield. On the main display, the cultist forces surged forward, their weapons blazing with renewed intensity. "Sir," Admiral Talara's voice crackled over the comm, "the Dyson sphere's antimatter matrix is destabilizing. We can't trigger the singularity." The Riansu engineer's fingers flew across his console. Moments later, the space around Artigo erupted in a dazzling display of energy. Sapped munition mines exploded in cascading waves, creating a hazardous radiation barrier between the Allied fleet and the advancing Purge warships. As the Allied ships began their desperate withdrawal, Zephyr's flagship shuddered under the impact of enemy fire. He gripped the edge of the tactical display, watching as his forces scattered across the sector. In the war room of his flagship, Zephyr faced his exhausted commanders. "We've lost, Artigo," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of their defeat. "The anti-matter lure plan failed. We don't have the firepower for another attempt." Eldrin slammed her fist on the table. "So what now? We can't just give up." As the meeting concluded, Zephyr pulled Eldrin aside. "I have a special assignment for you," he said, downloading mission parameters to her neural link. "Hit their soft targets. Use every asymmetric tactic in the book. Make them bleed." Eldrin's eyes gleamed with fierce grit as she nodded and strode away. Over the next several days, reports flooded in from across the sector. Eldrin's commando teams struck with surgical precision, unleashing swarms of hunter-killer munitions that tore through void shields and gutted Purge shipyards. Meanwhile, Talara led daring raids against occupied habitats, denying the cult the resources they desperately needed. Zephyr coordinated the insurgency from his constantly moving flagship, always one step ahead of the facilitator's forces. But even as they inflicted significant damage, the cost was staggering. "Sir," a sensor operator called out, "multiple Purge vessels converging on Admiral Talara's position." Zephyr watched in horror as Talara's flagship came under withering fire. A blinding particle lance sliced through the bridge, and for a heart-stopping moment, he feared the worst. Then a single escape pod blipped on the sensors, racing away from the doomed vessel. Rage burned through Zephyr's veins. He turned to his weapons officer, his voice cold and deadly. "Prepare the negative proton payload," he ordered. "Target their primary shipyards." "This is General Zephyr," he began. "The time has come for a unified assault. All units converge on the following coordinates and prepare to execute Operation Singularity Storm." Across the sector, Allied ships locked onto their targets. A cluster of dormant white dwarf stars scattered throughout the region. As one, they unleashed a barrage of mass driver rounds, each impact precise and devastating. But even as hope surged through him, Zephyr knew the battle was just getting started. The Facilitator was cunning and ruthless, and the Singularity Storm was only a temporary setback. As his battered forces regrouped, Zephyr's mind was already racing, planning their next move in this desperate struggle for existence itself. "We've disrupted their formation," Admiral Talara reported, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "The Singularity Storm is causing widespread havoc in their fleet." Before Zephyr could issue new orders, alarms blared across the command deck. Sensor operators called out in panic as data streams flooded their screens. Zephyr's blood ran cold as he processed the implications. "It's a scorched earth tactic," he realized aloud. "They're trying to eliminate our support base." The commando leader's face appeared on the main screen, her features streaked with grime and blood. "It's bad, sir," she reported. "We've lost contact with most of our ground forces. The gray tide is unstoppable. It's breaching every defense we throw at it." Zephyr's mind raced, weighing impossible choices against dwindling options. With a heavy heart, he made his decision. "Initiate the Samson contingency," he ordered, his voice leaden with the weight of millions of lives. "We can't let the Facilitator claim these worlds." Across the sector, antimatter silos detonated in blinding flashes of annihilation. Entire planets were reduced to cosmic dust, denying the Purge their conquest through utter destruction. As the fires of devastation raged, an encrypted transmission cut through the chaos. Zephyr's eyes widened as he recognized the signature. A cabal of xenocrat exiles, long thought lost to the void. "General Zephyr," a raspy voice intoned, "we have information critical to your fight. The Facilitator's endgame is far worse than you imagine." The xenocrats shared their intelligence, classified data from pre-Purge archives. As Zephyr absorbed the horrifying truth, he knew their next move would determine the fate of existence itself. "Assemble the War Council," Zephyr commanded, his voice steel. "It's time for the Ouroboros maneuver." As preparations began, Zephyr retreated to his quarters. He stared out at the star-flecked void, acutely aware that it might be the last time he witnessed its cold beauty. With steady hands, he recorded a final message for those who might come after. "Good hunting, sir," she said, her eyes fierce with grit. "We'll give them hell out here." Zephyr nodded, allowing himself a grim smile. "See you on the other side, Commander." The hangar doors yawned open, revealing the cosmic battlefield beyond. Zephyr's hands tightened on the controls as he engaged the slipstream drive. The stars blurred into streaks of light as the craft accelerated to superluminal velocities, hurtling towards its final fateful rendezvous with the galactic core. The fabric of reality blurred as Zephyr's craft tore through the slipstream, hurtling towards its destiny. In the command center of his flagship, Admiral Talara surveyed the tactical display. "All units execute diversionary pattern Gamma 3, she ordered. "Draw their attention away from the galactic core." Meanwhile, Eldrin's stealth craft ghosted through the shadows of gas giants and asteroid fields. Her team uploaded viral payloads into Purge communication relays, sowing confusion and misdirection throughout their network. Aboard his doomed vessel, Varlak's hands danced across his console. "Apocalypse weapon primed," he transmitted. "Initiating premature detonation sequence. It's been an honor, my friends." Zephyr's slipstream runner rocketed towards its target, riding the shockwave of precisely timed annihilation blasts. Each detonation opened a momentary rift in space-time, propelling the craft ever closer to the galactic core. Zephyr's grip tightened on the controls. "Prepare negative antimatter payload," he commanded, On my mark, fire! A deafening roar filled the cabin as conflicting probability waves crashed against the hull. For a heart-stopping moment, Zephyr feared they would be torn apart by the quantum maelstrom. Zephyr blinked, disoriented. The sleek controls of the runner had vanished, replaced by the familiar layout of a Riansu science vessel. Outside the viewports, a very different starscape greeted his eyes. "Status report," he barked, falling back on the years of training. "Sir," a bewildered officer responded, "we're detecting Earth expeditionary vessels on an intercept course. They're charging weapons." As klaxons blared and his crew scrambled to battle stations, a chill ran down Zephyr's spine. The immediate danger had passed, but something far worse loomed on the cosmic horizon. In rewriting history, they had disturbed ancient forces best left undisturbed. Zephyr squared his shoulders, already formulating plans to forge a new alliance. The purge may have been erased, but the fight for existence itself had only just begun. Zephyr's mind reeled as he absorbed the tactical readouts. Earth vessels bore down on their position, weapons primed. His crew, oblivious to the cosmic reset, scrambled to battle stations. "Evasive pattern Delta 3, he barked, muscle memory kicking in. The science vessel lurched, narrowly avoiding a barrage of photon torpedoes. As klaxons blared, Zephyr caught his reflection in a darkened viewscreen. His face was younger, unmarred by the scars of countless battles against the purge, but his eyes held the weight of erased timelines. Zephyr nodded grimly. "Seal all bulkheads. Prepare for close-quarters combat." The deck shuddered as grappling beams latched onto the hull. Moments later, the screech of plasma torches echoed through corridors as Earth Marines cut their way inside. Zephyr's body tensed, dormant symbiotes stirring beneath his skin. As the first humans breached the bridge, he unleashed a feral roar. His form rippled and swelled, flesh and metal fusing into a nightmarish hybrid. "Fall back!" the Marine sergeant bellowed. "What the hell is that thing?" Zephyr's mutated vocal cords produced an inhuman laugh. He lunged forward, seizing the sergeant's head in a massive claw. With a sickening crunch, the human skull imploded. Zephyr turned to his shell-shocked crew. "To the escape pods," he growled. "I'll buy you time." Reaching engineering, he overrode safety protocols on the antimatter reactor. The ship bucked as he ejected the unstable core, using the detonation to slingshot them into warp. "So this is how it begins," Zephyr muttered, bracing for impact. The pod streaked through the atmosphere, sensors overloading from the barrage of incoming fire. With a bone-jarring crash, Zephyr's craft plowed into the outpost's outskirts. Dazed but alive, he stumbled from the wreckage. In the distance, klaxons wailed as the human defenders mobilized. "Let the assimilation begin," he whispered, melting into the shadows as the first human patrols approached.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.